Hello, everyone. I'm Chris. This is Ezra. We're going to be speaking about an incredibly overlooked, bespoke topic today. It's called artificial intelligence, often abbreviated as AI. It is strange how ubiquitous the topic has become and how quickly ubiquitous it's become. And the dynamics right now, I think, from the perspective of political economy and politics are both incredibly fascinating and incredibly fraught. The polling suggests that there is a genuine backlash that's brewing. You're seeing it both in quantitative data in polling, but also in individual fights over data centers, particularly where this has been channeled. At the same time, a shocking percentage of US capital expenditure, business investment, and the driver of GDP growth is located in a relatively small few hands that are controlling what is the largest at this point percentage of GDP investment the country's probably ever seen, even surpassing the numbers for the railroad build out in the late 19th century, which was the previous record holder. And amidst this, a real question about what the two parties, what the political coalitions, and what the political positions, both from a political standpoint in campaigning and from a governing standpoint, are calling for. And so we thought we would try to just solve all that in the next 28 minutes and 34 seconds. I guess my first question to you is I do think there's a real jump ball now. I saw Ron DeSantis today posted on X a poll that showed people overwhelmingly opposed to data centers. And he has been clearly kind of making some noises around being a sort of AI skeptic. How do you read the politics of it broadly?
So I think the politics of it are bad on a bunch of different levels for everybody. I'm going to pull DeSantis to the side, as I often try to do in life, and just start with one big principle, the main thing that I want to come here today and say, which is that what AI is and whether it is good or bad is not an intrinsic structure of the technology, but is a set of political decisions. It is up to us. And one of the things I mean by that is right now, I think, particularly on the Democratic side, but also on the Republican side, there's a tremendous amount of correct concern about what I would call AI harm, and a set of questions about how to create an agenda around AI harm. What about job displacement? What about algorithmic bias? And the way AI has not just been sold, but genuinely, I think, one of the possible futures it could represent, but the one that the heads of the labs talked about for a very long time and that people listened to them, was AI as a technology for taking away your job and maybe eventually displacing human sovereignty over our own future. And now you've started to hear people in the AI lab say AI has a marketing problem, a branding problem. But if it does that, it's an actual problem. That's a bad, terrible vision. There needs to be a set of policies, and people are thinking hard about these, that are around preventing harms. There also need to be a set of policies that are around creating and harnessing goods. The things that are promised to us from AI that actually seem genuinely plausible to me, like, for instance, a radical acceleration in the rate of useful molecules to test in drug discovery, are not going to lead to new drugs if we don't change how the drug discovery process works and change how the financing of it works so it can happen much, much, much faster, right? This is true in energy. It is true in how the government uses AI. It would be trivial now for the IRS to have a large language model that does your taxes for you, and in a way Direct File wasn't capable of doing, goes back and forth even on complex taxes, but then you have to actually make that happen. And so there needs to be, I think, both agenda to prevent AI harm, but an agenda to force and make possible AI goods. And the technology, what it means for society back and forth, whether it is good or bad, it has been treated as if it is out of our hands, a non-political question. But it is a political question. And if the only thing you do is try to prevent harms from these labs racing for profit as fast as they can, of course you're not going to get a great outcome out of that. For AI to actually work for the public good, there will have to be an agenda in which the public decides what it wants and then shapes the market and shapes the rules and shapes the reality around that.
Yeah, I 100% agree on that. Although I would say that I don't think the technology has an inherent valence necessarily, but I also think it's not neutral in this sense. Like, one of the things I think a lot in comparing it to the internet, which, we're always searching for analogs for it, but there's a few things about the internet that I think shaped particularly the first few decades of it, even if that's now vestigial. One is that it was architecturally, it was distributed. The whole point of it was to be distributed. And the whole point of that distribution of a distributed network, which comes out of ARPANET and sort of resilience in the face of a nuclear attack or something like that, meant that the sort of distributed nature of it as a set of open source protocols, as a set of ways that different people can interact with it, gave a kind of generative space for lots of different people to kind of plug into it. One of the things that really strikes me about AI right now, from a sort of political economy perspective, is that inherent in the technology, in the current way it's being developed, is you need just an enormous raw amount of power and GPUs. That necessarily right now, and that it may change, right, because we might get different models that don't work this way, that necessarily depends on concentrated power and very deep pockets with a few firms. And so I do worry a little bit about like the degree, just from the sort of political economy of this new technology, where it feels, whatever its benefits might be for people, the concentration feels kind of baked into me. Like, it feels like a very non-distributed kind of thing. It feels ultimately also not that competitive, even though it's competitive among these 3 or 4 models, right? This sense that there's going to be a few winners, that it'll be, that it's going to be dominated maybe by winner take all. And that's the thing that I keep coming back to about the regulatory question, is like how to think about the market structure in terms of what the government's doing, if that's the inherent nature of the tech.
Let me poke maybe or push on that in 2 ways. So one, again, I think that's a choice and sometimes reflects the way that even on the Democratic side, there has been a real limitation in imagination of what the public can do. If you could have a public option for health insurance run by the government, there's no particular reason the government couldn't have GPU clusters.
100%.
And in other countries, they will. It is a reflection, I think, of the way we have severed ourselves off from having powerful public options in this country, that we almost don't even think about it. It's like, well, it turns out we can run libraries. Bookstores don't just have to be private. Like, why couldn't we do that? And I bet you in some cases the military will. I mean, the one part of the government that is thinking more like this is a national security state. The other thing here is that what you're saying about concentration of power might be true. And it is definitely the story the leading AI labs want us to believe, because they want the investors to believe that too. So the sort of implicit story, sometimes explicit, told by Anthropic, told by OpenAI, told by Google, Alphabet, is that we are in a limited period race to recursively self-improving superintelligence. And whoever wins that race is going to win everything. And maybe, I don't totally push that out as a kind of, in my view, sort of low probability event. But there's another view, which is that there's actually not much moat on this stuff at all. Like, how did Grok, whatever else you think about Elon Musk, come functionally out of nowhere to have not be the leading model on the market, but be a couple of months behind the leading models on the market, when it didn't start anywhere near as early as OpenAI, as Google, where the foundational research was done, as Meta, which had, Yann LeCun, who was one of the founders. There are a lot of people I know in the VC world who think there's actually no moat on this stuff at all. That, in fact, we're getting really, really good at it. And the reason China is so close to us is you can distill the models pretty easily, which is only to say that I don't think it is baked in. Like, a lot of what is going to create concentrations of power, if they happen, or one, I do take your point about GPUs and the amount of money you need to train, but we could approach that with public options and other things. But the other thing is the ability to switch between things and go to new players if we make entrance easier is pretty real there. So again, I keep wanting us to, I don't mean to say the technology is neutral. I don't believe any technology is truly neutral. They all have embedded ideas in them and embedded pathways in them. But I do think that there's been a tendency to treat the technology as almost self-directed, as opposed to being genuinely amenable or shaped by political choices and public choices, which give us, the public, agency over it.
So let's talk about two different ways of conceiving. I mean, there's a bunch of different layers at which you can imagine policy here. One is in this question about market structure, right? Whether that's competition policy or whether that's some sort of public option. The other way that you could conceive of it is regulatory oversight, right? Like to the point that you were saying before about the way our imagination about the possibilities of the public sector and also public regulation have kind of been cramped. You know, when you take a step back and think about the enormous amount of technical capacity necessary for a central bank and the FDA or the FTC or the SEC, and we can go down the line, right? Or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In all these cases, you've got something that's very technically complex and sophisticated. It's possibly very dangerous, whether it's nuclear weapons or depressions. And you don't want to basically have a vote of Congress on interest rates and where to store the nukes, right? So you've got some kind of question where you want some level of democratic oversight and democratic accountability and also technical expertise. And the creation of this enormous sort of ecology of the administrative state that grows up to deal with precisely this problem. And there's like more of these than most people who've never worked in government even know. Like there's like 3 different railroad commissions that are appointed. And when you come into a new administration, you get there's a spreadsheet that has all these positions you have to fill. And most people have never heard of a lot of these bodies. It's not, I mean, that seems to me like an obvious model for AI, right? Like there's some sort of way that we could conceive of some balance between democratic accountability, technical expertise that says like whether a model is safe or not, right? Or whether it could be released or not. We're so far from that conversation now. But that seems like one obvious place, again, this is at the highest level, that you could at least conceptually think of what some approach would look like.
I want to drop a layer beneath that. What do we want this technology to do? How do we want the future to be different than the present? That until we have some set of views on that, right? If what you hope AI does, there are people in my life who have currently incurable chronic diseases. One way artificial intelligence could make my life much better is accelerate cures for those diseases. What would need to happen? Not just in the development of it, but in the financial incentives it has, and then in the way we test and accelerate drugs to make that happen and happen quickly for as many diseases as possible. That there are a lot of different things that technology, because it is a general purpose technology, can do or not do. You were asking earlier about analogies. The internet is maybe one. I think energy is probably a better one. That energy is not like a railroad. We know we want there to be a railroad infrastructure. What the railroad is meant to do is like pretty straightforward. Energy, we are sort of trying to wire energy into everything, but in order to make that useful, you have to wire things for energy. Right? It's classic, economic history now that it took a long time for the gains of electricity to actually show up in the economy because people didn't know how to use it. And so the very fact of it being in some way available doesn't matter if your factory is not built for electricity. One of the things that I see happening right now when I go out to San Francisco and do this reporting, and Chris has been doing a great podcast series focused on AI as well, is I'm watching companies that are building themselves from the ground up to use this well. Their code bases are internally unified. Their Slack messages work in a very different way because they're making their entire organization legible to artificial intelligence, so then the artificial intelligence can be more useful to the organization. If you want to go a step further than what they're attempting to do, which is accelerate their coding, if you want to make it more possible to do what Governor Newsom was saying on the stage a bit ago and build more things more effectively, more rapidly, and new kinds of things in the real world, then you have to begin to wire the world. You have to begin to reconstruct how we build. Right now, we have trouble in a lot of places building homes. Homes are a solved technology. We're not lacking capacity. We're not lacking innovation here. If we want to create new things, that's even harder. And so I really want to hold on this question because I think there's a tendency in the Democratic, the progressive, the liberal, the leftist mind to fit it into the fights we've been having, to fit it into competition policy. That's fine. I want competition in AI. At the moment, I broadly think we have it. to fit it into regulatory policy, because I think we still think we failed on social media by not regulating the harms quickly enough. That's good. I want to do all of that. I am genuinely worried about AI harms. I've been covering them for years now. But if we do not actually create like a set of ideas about what we want to achieve, we're just not going to achieve them, because all of the energy and all the investment, to your point about these companies who are having to pay back investors over time, is going to go into what there's already a business model to do. And so if the public has no view, what the public wants done is never going to happen.
Right. But part of that is, if we sort of go back to the experience people have had of the economy, like I love the Keynes essay about the economic prospects of our grandchildren, and returned to a lot and wrote about it in my last book. And, it's fun because there's a certain kind of utopian thinking. It's not utopian because he actually thinks there's going to be a lot of challenges. But, and you go back to the Marx portion where he talks about how you can be like a fisher in the morning and a critic in the evening and a hunter in the afternoon. And you're none of those things, because in this era of plenty, right, when you've gotten rid of limitations, which is the problem that he thought he was solving for and that Keynes thinks that 20th century capitalism will solve for, right, that no one has to work anymore. And I think if you were to articulate a kind of pie in the sky vision, well, okay, what happens if the computers can do all, if they can do all the thinking, and they can push out the productivity frontier big enough, and we can get rocket growth, right? That money's going to flow somewhere, and maybe we all get to be, who's the guy who says we all get to be lords, right? Like we all become essentially the kind of lordly class that used to exist in feudal systems when a very, very small percentage of people didn't have to do any work at all because all the work was being done for them. I think the problem is, and maybe that's not the vision that you would articulate, but that's one vision, right? Like the sort of...
I'm not going for indolent lords.
Yeah. Like maybe if there's some universe of sort of boundless abundance and boundless plenty, and people don't have to like work jobs they hate anymore, which an enormous percentage of people in our society do. I just think it just seems so impossible to conceive that even if you gave like a slightly less utopian, curing diseases or things like that, it's hard to get your arms around like what the bounty looks like, because people just don't trust it will be allocated to them.
This is why I really think that it is time for the AI discussion to get off of far future thought experiments. And look, I have participated in a lot of them in my time, and I've talked about paperclip maximizing and boundless abundance and the whole lot of it. And when AI was a speculative technology, it was worth talking about, at least as a way to discipline your own intuitions about it. We are here. The technology is here. Its pace of improvement is unknown. I am not really of a belief that we're going to be in superintelligence in 2 years. We are not coming to boundless abundance anytime soon, in my view. We are not going to be at mass job displacement anytime soon, if ever, in my view. I mean, I think it's not going to happen for the same reason Keynes was wrong, and that we will endlessly create new wants, new desires, new forms of social status competition, which doesn't mean we will not have some job displacement. One of my views about AI, which is like a little bit weirder to be honest, is that in a way, societally, we would be better at dealing with 80 million people losing their jobs than 8 million. Because if it was 80 million like COVID, we would do a society-wide response. We would not blame people. Yep. But if it's 8 million, we're going to blame them. We're going to say, you communications major. Well, look, most people, the communications major, are still getting a job. It's just that unemployment in that major has gone up 3x. You should figure it out. And that's when we did this in the China shock. We've done this in a lot of cases, and it actually worries me a lot more. I think we have been so caught on these big thought experiments, 50% of all entry-level white-collar jobs gone in 2 to 3 years, that we're going to actually be caught unprepared by being faced again, as we so often are, with the same problems we always run into, which is bottlenecks for doing real things in the real world, which is some people getting richer and not us not having an effective way to tax that capital, the buy, borrow, die dimension that Newsom and others, Ray Madoff on my show, have talked about so well. The difficulty of setting a public agenda as companies become very powerful. Right now, Andreessen Horowitz is the biggest spender in the 2026 midterms. They spend according to reporting I just saw in the Times, over $115 million. They have a very radically deregulatory accelerationist agenda for AI, crypto, and other things, right? AI is not putting us in a place where none of the old constraints bite. It is putting us in a place where the bottlenecks of the real world and the questions of power in some ways bite more. And so I think in order to know how to solve or answer the questions that are coming immediately, we actually have to discipline more tightly what those questions are. If we want, I keep using drug development because I think it's at least a very concrete example. If we want AI to get us more drug discovery, then we have to ask what the next bottleneck is going to be if we get a much more rapid acceleration of molecules worth testing on human beings. Right now, it is very, very hard under the way we've built the system to find enough people to go into phase 3 trials. We could create interoperable electronic records that actually mean we know all the people in the country with a certain disease pattern. And then we could tell them that there's a trial that could help them. We do this for a couple of things right now. It is radically accelerated drug development for some cancers, but we don't do it for most things. That's not like a super sexy, fun AI thought experiment, but it could really matter. Like you could look at this for energy. You could look at this for building efficiency. You could look at this for how people interact with the government. My wife, Annie Lowrey, is releasing his book in a couple months on the time tax, the incredible difficulty of navigating the amount of time it takes to figure out what the government has to offer you and what it takes to qualify for it. There's no actual reason that needs to be your time. That is a political choice we have made. It would be trivial. The IRS has the data on what your financial situation is. There could be not only an LLM that helps you with your taxes, but actually tells you what you qualify for all across the federal government, or for that matter, state governments all at once. But in order to do that, we need to make the data talk to each other. We need to break down current privacy regulations that make that impossible. We are at the point where AI is material possibilities. If we treat it so speculatively, like in some ways, I think that's buying in at this point to the game the labs are playing, right? I'm not saying none of that might ever happen, but I do think that it is probably a little bit more unlikely to happen than they want you to think. And the best way to be able to deal with it then is to be good at dealing with the problems we're going to have with it now. I want to turn a question on you, though, because you've been doing this series on it. One of the things that I see happening, and we're here at CAP, is when I read Abundance, one of the big questions in it, or the back half of it, was about, with Derek Thompson, was about how do you build a left? How do you build a relationship where the left doesn't just see technology as a social problem, but technology as a way to solve social problems? And my sense is AI has made this problem much, much worse. Affectively, the relationship between the left and technology is like worse than it has ever been. I think climate change is beginning to ease this because there's a recognition we needed green energy to solve our problems and technological innovation, and AI has made it much worse. Because it does present all these problems of power and concentration, like how do you navigate that tension?
Well, that's why I think you need to have some I think you have to have some story of what's in it for people that is legible and plausible. That because right now, right now the latest data, and I don't think it's born of AI. I think it's born of a lot of things. Has the lowest share of, total income going to labor versus capital that we've ever seen. The way that the labs again sell investment into the models is that it's going to push that number even further, right? That's the whole point. Like
a billboard right outside my office, it just says "Stop hiring humans."
Yes,
like what a ghoul.
Yes,
to create that.
And so I think there's a sense in which, unless there's some distributive story, and I don't mean distributive in the sense of like we're going to tax it and give you a check. I mean like literally what's in it for me. I just think it's a very tough sell, and I also don't think the skepticism doesn't seem at all crazy to me. It seems totally rational. Like we're going to build this data center. Maybe there's going to be some jobs here, but fundamentally, like a bunch of really rich people who fundamentally like want to get rid of you are going to use it to get rid of you. Is basically the story now. And I think you're right to flip it on its head. It's like, well, what would we want? What would we want the technology to do? What if the LLMs could be good at doing your taxes? What if we could unblock all sorts of new ways of getting drugs? But I just think I guess what I'm saying is I don't think you could detach it from some distributive story about who has power and who's benefiting. And I think if you talk about things like in the abstract, what I think people are going to, particularly people on the left, but I think generally people's skepticism of this is high anyway, is going to think that they're going to be left out in the cold. And right now, it's hard to see a lot of reasons why that's not the case. Again, to your point about it's not the future, it's now. Like, the stock market's booming. There's going to be trillions of dollars of capital allocation to this. Lots of people use the technology. They like it. Maybe it drives a few of them insane. But what the tangible benefits are for people outside, I think, a relatively small group of people, I think, remains very abstract.
And that's where I actually think the political system is failing. That, of course, that's not going to come from the corporations.
Right.
They're not going to tell a story about how they're going to become less powerful. They're not going to create a world. I mean, I remember the tour from OpenAI people some years ago about how much they wanted to be regulated. And I look at what Leading the Future, the PAC partially funded by OpenAI co-founder Greg Brockman, how much it is spending against Alex Boris in New York because he has had the temerity to try to do very modest safety-oriented regulation of AI. And so, like, this is what I mean, that if the way the public relates to it is to just say developing this and deciding how it's used is entirely the private market's prerogative, and we are just going to try to prevent harms around the edge, then there's no chance for that democratic vision you're talking about.
And I do think, Shrikant Chakrabarty, who's running in that Scott Wiener district in Pelosi district, does have this kind of like public AI model campaign plank, which I think is interesting, like that we should have a government administered LLM that, that our own lab that's working on this, that hires the best talent. And I do think thinking about some public stake or some public part in this is one first step in that. But I also think that, like, I want to ask this question because we have a question from the audience. And I think it sort of brings us to the data center fight, because that's where, like, the rubber hits the road on all this. Like, at some level, I'm extremely sympathetic to people fighting the data centers. At another level, there's part of me that's like, well, this is just the NIMBY gun pointed at another target. Usually I don't like the target they're pointing it at, but maybe this target's fine. And this question from the audience is, how would a system of government in the abundance model balance ensuring public sector decisions are both effective and democratic? We're seeing these fights over data centers. How would it resist capture by big corporations?
It's a big question. To keep it on the data center point, the thing I have heard talking to a lot of governors, mayors, representatives involved in the data center fights, because, like, to be blunt about this question, the way the American political system tries to balance this is that we elect people, and they're supposed to be able to balance the various incentives and interests of society in a way that makes sense. And the thing that I think the people who are more forward-looking on this are saying is, look, if you want all these data centers, what you have to do is not just pay for the electricity they're going to use. Like, that's table stakes. This is a tremendous amount of investment, a railroads level of investment that is going to genuinely be either a huge strain or an opportunity for transformation of a lot of our infrastructure, particularly our energy infrastructure. And so the data center build out has to be harnessed, in their view, to some public vision about how it is actually benefiting the communities it is part of. In this way, data centers are not like homes. When we argue that it should be easier to build homes, the reason it should be easier to build homes is it is good for people to be able to live in communities.
Yes, exactly.
Like like the idea is not omni-building, right? I don't want you to be able to build more coal power plants because those are bad for communities. And the question of whether a data center is good for, like, the community it is in, there's questions about the broader state, about the broader country, right? There's questions about the air race with China, but the question about whether it's good for a community is in, that is something we actually know how to at least try to think about balancing. Now, you could at the state level create framework legislation about what kinds of investments in the grid, what kinds of investments in water, what kinds of investments in modernizing, like, desperately needed, in creating modernization that is desperately needed in order to build big build-outs you want to force. And then if you create a clear, like, set of rules of the road, then there's certainty on how to invest and what you can get done. But what all the people actually dealing with this at town hall meetings tell me, and I think they're right about, is that unless you can tell, like, a town what is in it for them, they don't want it, and they're right.
Right.
That
yes,
nothing is
exactly.
in it for them except a bit of tax revenue. So but that's not impossible if there's all this money behind it. Money is fungible. Money can do a lot of things, and particularly as an opportunity to modernize our energy grid. This is maybe the biggest opportunity for private capital to do that ever.
And yes, modernize the grid, build out capacity, all that stuff. Well, you can mark down at 229.58 when we solved all this in your books. Ezra Klein, of the New York Times.
Thank you, Chris Hayes, MSN Now.